Okay, hi everyone, welcome. So I am Sandra Crawford from Alice, which is a free website for business owners to start and grow their companies. And we are joined today by PepsiCo expert, Homi Battiwalla, who is the Senior Director for Global Marketing Excellence at PepsiCo. And this is part of the WomanMade program that PepsiCo is running, which is specifically helping female entrepreneurs in the food and beverage industry. So thank you so much, Homi, for joining us today. We've got a really, really interesting discussion planned for you all. So as you're coming in here, please feel free to use the chat function on the side of your screen to let us know where you're joining us from and a little bit about your company. And then throughout Homi's presentation later, feel free to add in questions that you have for him. There's a question and answer feature that you can use, and that'll help us make sure that we get to your question and it doesn't get lost in the chat. But you can also chat as well throughout and let us know how we're doing. All right, so without further ado, a little bit about Homi Battiwalla. He is, as I've said before, the Senior Director for Global Marketing Excellence at PepsiCo, and he's responsible for driving the transformation of PepsiCo's global marketing function. So working in close cooperation with senior marketing leaders across PepsiCo's categories and businesses around the world. So Homi leads the work on building marketing capability in line with PepsiCo's emphasis of faster, stronger, better. Not the Daft Punk song, I don't think. And he leads the identification of capability areas, development of playbooks for key processes, and he develops and delivers marketing training sessions and workshops, hopefully not too much unlike this one. So Homi, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do and what we'll be learning today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Sandra. And hello, everyone. I can see there are 15 or maybe 13 people in addition to the two of us on this call. So really, really happy to be with you all. I must also say it's a real privilege to be with such entrepreneurial women who are doing such amazing work. I wish I had the guts to start something on my own. And I think it takes a lot to get to do what you are doing. So I'm really happy to be with you all. In fact, I should be attending a program trying to know how to get to do things versus the reverse way. But happy to be here. Sandra did give a little bit of an introduction to me. I'm what you would call a PepsiCo lifer. It's the only company I've worked in. I have been with it now for the past 22 years. But interestingly, I haven't been in the US for too long. I have only been in the US for the last 4 years. I have spent most of my working career in Asia, where I was both in India and then in the Middle East and Africa region, working on our business. As you would expect, the reality of these markets are very different from the world's most developed markets, which is in the West and especially in the US. But in my last 4 years in the US, I have managed to spend some time working in our North America beverage business. It is an incredibly massive business. So the scale sometimes is frightening, but I think there's a lot to learn working over there. Then I kind of worked on our global side once again, and I'm now working on something called marketing capability. And I assure you, I am not going to do something equivalent to a training program, because the moment someone hears the word marketing capability, it feels that I'm kind of doing something around training. And in fact, it's actually further from it. So I'm going to dive just right in, if it's okay with everyone. And I know that the last time you spoke with one of our other colleagues, Tapan, which was, I don't know, was it last month or last fortnight? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You had a nice freewheeling chat, but I thought I'm going to take you actually through a kind of a presentation, because I think it'll help set the context of what I'd really like this conversation to be focused on. I think it will be a lot more useful. It's interesting. At PepsiCo, we have all these huge brands. The world assumes that we are the coolest marketers in the world. And while we've done some great work, my boss often says that we typically do amazing work somewhere, but it's not that we are super consistent at doing awesome work all the time, everywhere. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to kind of help actually, it's a twofold thing. And I think you'll find it interesting. One is, how do we help get people to do marketing better? But more importantly, we're probably one of the few companies which has never had an established way of doing things. And we actually kind of setting out to create what is the PepsiCo way of marketing? What is the PepsiCo way of building brands, of growing brands? We never had that. We're very entrepreneurial too. That way, our regions are independent. And there was a time when that was awesome. But the world has changed really fast. There's too much going on. Trying to do everything by ourselves is not turning out to be the right thing. And information flows from everywhere. Products flow from everywhere. So while keeping in mind the need for local and regional relevance, it's extremely important for us to be able to learn from each other, for able to lift and shift platforms, transfer best practices, and really make things happen quicker. And I was telling Sandra before the call started that our new CEO who took over last year, he said it in his first address to us that I want us to spend less time debating how to do things, much more emphasis on what is it that we do, the output that we get, and making sure that it impacts the business. So that's kind of what I kind of work in this company. And what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to talk you through two things. One, how do we build brands at PepsiCo? It's interesting. When someone asked us this question 2 years back, we actually didn't have it in writing. We knew it, but we just couldn't phrase it because it was never there. So I want to kind of talk you through a part of that framework. And second is, how do brands grow? I think that would be of great interest to you. And I would tell you right now that, of course, the lens that all our presentations have is for big brands, billion-dollar brands, and all of that. But we have done so much work to understand that it is equally applicable to smaller brands and emerging brands. Of course, there's a timeline. Of course, there's a journey. We've been around for 50, 60 years with some of our brands. Some of our brands are kind of relatively new. They're 5, 8, 10 years old. We launched something last year. So it's a little bit of that. So that's the two things I'd like to talk to you about. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see this presentation. I'm just trying to make sure it goes on the... Okay. As my screen shared, I hope you're able to see everything. Awesome.
Yes,
all right.
Great.
Super. So we actually call this building indispensable brands at PepsiCo. We all build brands, but we realize we live in a time where our brands need to be indispensable. And I think that is applicable to everyone, because otherwise what happens that we essentially end up creating and selling products with some amount of a brand attached to it, which comes and goes until the next cycle, the next sphere of innovation, the next cool new thing comes on the board and it goes away. What ultimately survives are very, very strong brands, which consumers cannot really do without. So we believe that building indispensable brands requires a kind of a more modern and a holistic process. In our portfolio, we've always called out brands like Mountain Dew, Gatorade, Doritos as a lot more indispensable than some of our other brands. It's ironic, right? We find it more indispensable than a brand like Pepsi. It's just because they're much sharper. They're defined much sharper. Our consumers are some of our strongest fans who feel they can't live without it because of something unique that it brings to the table. The challenge to us is, how do we apply this to all of our brands, big and small? And what is the science that can, help us get there? So we do it in 3 ways. And essentially, there are 3 things that we focus on. One, we have realized that we need to be much more focused on consumer centricity. We are incredibly focused as an organization on our customers, on our retailers, because we know they're extremely important. I won't say that we're not focused on consumers who actually buy us, but I think we could probably do a much better job. And one of our biggest differences is to no longer talk to them as consumers, but talk to them as people. And it's like many of you must know, we do focus groups and we do interviews and we do all of that. We don't want to just talk to them about what they buy and why they buy and when they buy. We want to talk to them about their lives, their interests, what troubles them, what makes them click, what are the barriers. And this whole human centricity, as we call it, is a real big area of emphasis for us. And I think it should be for anyone who tries to launch brands. The second is, you heard this term, we were earlier in the business of creating exciting brands. Our brands were exciting. It was about the next big celebrity, the next big platform. It was being a part of pop culture. All of that stands. But today, people are looking for brands with real meaning. The whole notion of brand purpose, it's not just about saving the world. I mean, sometimes people kind of mistake brand purpose with societal role and, corporate social responsibility. It's kind of a spectrum. But what is the role that any brand plays in the life of a consumer? Whether it's a potato chip brand, whether it's a small emerging spice brand, or whether it's a healthy juice drink, what is the role in the life of the consumer? Because if that comes together, we see that things become much better. So working on making our brands much more than just exciting, entertaining, and fun, infuse them with purpose and this whole experience, which is beyond just doing stuff on television or just doing stuff on Instagram. How do they feel, relate to a brand? That's something which we all need to keep thinking about. There's an entire ecosystem. It's not just media, it's much more than that. And in the process, as I explained at the start, we want to help people understand the way we do marketing across our foods and beverage portfolio. We have a little bit of a narrative which kind of will explain a little bit of what I'm talking about. I'm going to actually skip this, but what we realize is the world's really changed, right? I mean, you would all agree that this is not the same world as it was 15, 20 years back. We as food and beverage marketers feel the change more than probably anyone else because technology has come in. Our brands are more dispensable than ever before. Choices proliferated rapidly. Media and consumption habits and everything is changing faster than we can keep up with it. So we said, we have a great legacy, but we need to kind of change the way we work. And there are these three words I want you to focus on, which is dig, build, and scale, because I think it is the cornerstone of any brand building model. We just feel we need to do it better. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And this is what we do, right? We have defined our purpose, that we are here to grow brands because ultimately, let's face it, we are answerable to our shareholders. We are here to create growth. But more importantly, we are here to move people, real solutions, makes a difference to people in their lives. And we kind of defined ourselves in this whole space as we call grow brands that move people. That's kind of our identity at PepsiCo on the way we define marketing. And remember, I spoke to you about dig, build, and scale. We feel it is actually something which applies to any brand, any company. Because when you talk about dig, it's about every one of us must know what is going on out in the world before we create and launch a product. Are we really understanding what is it that drives people? What are the ideas? What are the motivators, barriers? That's the part which we call dig. The build is the very foundational aspect of our lives. This is the part which is where we create products, we create brands, we define a growth strategy. It's without a great foundation, everything else falls apart. And that's something we've learned at PepsiCo, that many cases we feel in some parts of our world, we need a strong scale up in some of our foundational capabilities because we sometimes take that for granted. And we realize that at the heart of it, there's some things which need to be done better. And scale is all about, the world is different. It's no longer about a television commercial. People do not have time for us. They are consuming our information in millions of ways and bombarded at the same time by different layers of information. So what is the right way to reach people every day, everywhere, as quickly as possible? And I think this is even tougher when you look at smaller brands, right? Because if you know who you're talking to, we got to figure out how to reach them also in a very kind of an efficient manner. And that is kind of the framework in which we look at building brands. Now, linked to this whole framework of dig, build, and scale, there are maybe 15 or 16 areas, I would almost call modular areas, which we kind of go deep into. And I'm not going to talk you through all of them. I don't think we have the time for that. But we feel that for any brand to do well and to be called indispensable, there are 5 things that we absolutely should focus on. First and foremost, for any brand, forget about global versus regional. The brand has to have a defined approach to how to grow. What is the growth strategy for the brand? how do we really expect this brand that we've either just launched or has been there for the last 20 years to grow over the next 3 to 5 years? What is the growth strategy? What are the principles on which we'll do that? Does everybody in that organization, small or big, understand that? And that's the first most important thing. The second is, if we are about creating brands, which we should be because people consume brands and not just products, it's really important to have a very well-defined purpose and make sure that in the minds of the consumer or the minds of the people who buy us, they are extremely clear about what is the role, what is that brand supposed to do for them beyond just like giving them a great tasting product or something which makes their food better. So that's the second thing. And then 3, 4, and 5 are all about, once you've done that foundational piece, what is the smartest, sharpest, and most efficient way for brands to reach people? Whether it's the way they plan it, whether it's the way they create content, because these days, I think one of the biggest changes in the world in the last 5 to 10 years has been smaller brands compete so much better than bigger brands because they don't have to spend billions of dollars on expensive Super Bowl spots, for example. They can do it with really smart, always on social media. We have one of our competitors, we've seen how well they've done it in the sparkling water segment, for example. And so there are various ways of like seeing that as a best example. And I had spoken about point number 5, which is brands come to life beyond just your screen. There is a world outside of the screen. When you go to shop, when you go to an event, when you show up in a sampling booth or in a food expo, in a restaurant, or in a multiplex, wherever, all of that kind of comes together. And we as a company, despite having been around for all these years and for all of our $65+ billion size, feel that these are the 5 areas which we absolutely need to like get down to perfection to make our brands indispensable. And I think it's a worthwhile framework for any new product or brand to think about as they go further. This is an example that we always talk about. One of our most indispensable brands is Gatorade. For all of you who are probably calling in from the US, no surprises, right? It's always been consistent. It's always been for the performance athlete, but yet people beyond that also consume. It's got a very clear purpose, and it really knows how to show up in the ecosystem of sports and campus and college and fitness. It's just there. It's not in the wrong place. It never is in the wrong place. Of course, it'll be there in the neighborhood Walmart and the Targets and wherever else. But beyond that, it's crystal clear on what it needs to do. So that brings me to the next part, which I want to spend the next 5-6 minutes. And you'll find this very interesting, which is how do brands really grow, new or big? And I have to say this, at PepsiCo, we had a bit of a hazy perspective on this. Many of us thought one way and some of us thought the other way. And it's interesting that in the more developed market, we were thinking something completely contrary to what is the reality, which is penetration. There's only one way brands grow, which is by driving household penetration. And let me drain this a little bit further. And this was a big study done in the US by Bain. And it was done over a long time period, over thousands of brands. And here's what they figured out. From your left, when you say getting consumers to buy more, that's the term which we all call frequency. And often we were in the trap of like, we've got to just find ways of people getting us to buy more, because guess what? Mountain Dew is so big in the US. Of course it is big, but that was just not enough. Some brands grow by constantly taking a price. There's a clear threshold, as you would imagine. People are very price sensitive, however affluent the market might be. The real growth comes when more and more households buy you. And therefore, for new emerging brands, it is probably the single most important thing to focus on as you look at it. We also looked at it within, and I'm actually sharing you some of our statistics. First, the same Bain analysis, when they did it, they did about 550 brands in the US, big brands, small brands, and it explains 70% of their growth. We looked at our iconic Frito-Lay business in the US, which is really massive, quite unchallenged. 65% of the growth that we get comes from penetration increase. We looked at China, and about again 60% of the growth comes penetration increase. So we've seen everything: developed markets, developing markets, big brands, small brands, medium-sized brands. We looked at tons of variables: foods, beverages, household products. It is always the same thing, which is penetration. Now, I think this is something you find very interesting, because often the moment we say penetration, people think it means, oh, it essentially means I got to just acquire more and more households. Right now, for many of you on this call, because you all have so many recent new products which are coming to the fore, that is probably true. But what one needs to remember, and there's an entire module on this, is as brands get bigger, and that's why marketing is such a difficult job. We've got many things to do. We've got people who bought us, we've got to retain them because they're actually the easiest. They remember you, they know you, they probably like you. So you've got to find ways of retaining them. You can never forget households and people who have bought us once. Then there are occasionally people who drop off. In fact, there's a lot of people who drop off. You've got to find ways of reclaiming them. And then, of course, it's acquisition. And then there's a further out lens, probably not as applicable for many of us, which is called occasion penetration, which is how penetrated are you in different occasions. Those are for brands which get very big, very deeply penetrated over a long life cycle. I think it's the first three, which is of real importance to us. And in the process, we've learned a lot of things. We've learned that loyalty is not really anymore a big thing in the world. There's very little brand loyalty. People switch at the drop of a hat. All you need to do is to go to your store, not find your favorite soda, you'll pick up whatever else is there. That's it. It's as simple as that. So loyalty is not as important. The second thing is many people often get obsessed with looking at those. You must have heard of the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your volume comes from 20% of your people. You realize that's wrong. That's not true. That statistic is completely off. It's only about 50%. So there are many myths that we have slayed in this process. And for all brands, I think it's something to think through, that even if you have acquired a lot of households, which makes your 1 year performance look great, it's not enough, because those households will drop off the next year. And it's pretty frightening. I'll give you a number. On a brand like Lay's in the US last year, we lost 22 million households. That's unbelievable, right? Of course, we did a great job in retaining and reclaiming more, so the brand still did brilliantly. But when we looked at that number, we just said, oh my gosh, we never thought that we were going to lose so many households. Why did we lose those households? What were we doing wrong? And that's when you start looking at that, you start unearthing a few things that could be of great importance. So now that I've explained to you that penetration is important, growing households is, I think the question which is, okay, so then how does one drive penetration? And it's actually two very simple things. One, which we call physical availability, and the other, which we call mental availability. Physical availability is as clear as you'd imagine. Like, it is the breadth and depth of your distribution in a time and space. Are you really there when the person's looking for you? But mental availability is probably the more interesting one, which is that, does a consumer really notice you, recognize you, and does the consumer even think of you at that occasion when he wants to buy something? So if the consumer is looking for, let's say, something to pick him up in the middle of the day where he's hungry and not his own self, which brand comes to his mind or her mind, And that is, I think, the two big things of physical and mental availability. And I think it's an interesting point, because I don't think it should scare off anyone which feels that, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money to spend, or oh my gosh, if we haven't reached a minimum threshold distribution, my product will never do well. No, what it shows is that you got to do both, but within that, you obviously have to prioritize your investments and select your levers. And I often give this example. There was a time in my life when one of my leaders had once told me, don't worry, this product is fantastic. Just put it on the shelves and it'll fly. And guess what? It never did fly. And now when I look at this, it was very clear. We did nothing on driving mental availability. We just put it on the shelf. Consumers are not really looking for our brands. It has to come to their mind in a certain way. And there's a real science to it. And sorry, I want to tell you all of this. This entire theory on how brands grow, it's based on a very, very on a book called How Brands Grow by a professor called Byron Sharp. If ever interested, I would encourage you all to pick up that book. It's available on Amazon. It's really fantastic. Most companies, big companies and small companies, have started embracing that principle. He took about 10 to 15 years to like really put it together, because he worked on a lot of data points to make sure that his theory didn't feel flaky enough. And now many companies across the world have started embracing it. And what we did was we took his book, but we just converted it into a way that makes sense for our business. So that's something I would encourage you to take a look at. So coming back, and this is my last few pages because I'm sure we'll have some questions on physical and mental availability. Don't have to spend too much time on it, but this mental availability piece is very important, as I said. There are three parts to it. Are you relevant? So if you really are operating in a category which is all about, let's say, taste and refreshment, are you really delivering on that through your messaging, your design, your packaging, or not? So that's one. Second, do you get thought of in that situation, which we call situation salience? Are you considered for the occasion? And third is the whole principle of distinction. And if there's one thing I'd love to talk about more, is this whole notion of distinction. Successful brands are increasingly distinctive. They are not differentiated. More often than not, we've seen brands and products, especially in today's age of like labeling and tons of claims, to try more and more differentiation by talking about what they have. And I can give you an example. You would see whiskey, triple barrel oak casks, or double barrel, or smoked in an oak container in Wales for the last 35 years. And that's the kind of claims that keep coming in. One versus the other, you kind of can't figure out, is double barrel, triple barrel, 10 years matured, 15 years matured? What does that mean? What's better? It just keeps coming and going. But a distinctive brand creates stuff which instantly allow you to pick it up. And we often give the example of the Johnny Walker, the man, keep walking, right? That makes the brand cut through instantly. And of course, they tick the boxes on their products. Or it's the classic example of Burger King doing flame grill versus McDonald's with its entire golden arches. It's very distinctive look and feel that makes it stand out. And nowadays we are seeing Burger King doing some pretty amazing work in driving distinction, whether it's the king, whether it's the way they are showing up. And it's all about the distinction. Could be visual, distinction could be audio. It could be a simple audio signature like the Intel inside, that sound, any mnemonic that allows you to recognize it. So it's something to really think about, because all of you are entrepreneurs creating exciting new products. And if you were to look at mental availability, it's an interesting lens to put on your products to say that, hey, am I really relevant to that category? Am I showing up in situations that are making sense? And am I distinctive? And is there anything we can do to make our products distinctive, especially when we are launching them, And physical availability is much more intuitive. You've got to be available physically. You've got to be visible on a shelf or wherever. If you're consuming it online, then you need to be visible in the online ecosystem. And you need to have this notion of utility, that you should have needs that you're addressing for a buyer. Like, if a buyer wants 0 calorie, are you delivering that? Or are you just like, sticking to your guns and not doing anything of that? So I think it all kind of comes together. Penetration is the way to drive growth. It's validated across the board. You do penetration by making sure you're not just acquiring new consumers, but you're also looking at retaining and reclaiming them. And then you do that through driving your mental availability and physical availability. And at PepsiCo, we take all of this and we are putting this on a simple page. And I think that's a really useful page for any marketer, any brand, any leader, any business head to have, which is that, okay, I have this brand. What am I going to do over the next 3 to 5 years? What are my business objectives? What's my marketing objective? What is the problem that we are solving for? I think awareness of the problem really helps. And the problem could be, I'm a small brand which is just not able to move out of the western part of the United States, and I'm looking for ways to expand my footprint, but nobody really knows about me. So that's the problem to solve. And then we break it down into what are marketing jobs to be done, what are the kind of actions that we take. It's not easy. When you put it all together like this, it is intuitive, but as I've been rolling it out across the world, and this year we've covered about 2,000 people in our company, we realized that it is tough because often we do things very instinctively, and we realize that a little bit of science and a little bit of process just makes you reflect on those instinctive decisions, whether we were doing it the right way or not. And that's where we are. So I just thought I'll give you this kind of a run through, very high level. I'm sorry if I've gone a bit too quick, but I just wanted to leave you with a little bit of a flavor on the recipe for driving brand growth. And what are the kind of things which you should, or everyone should consider at making their brands like grow over a period of time. What are the must-haves so that they become indispensable and so that no one would exchange you or get rid of you over a period of time.
That was amazing, Homi. I'm so thankful that you shared this with us. That was a great presentation. So for anyone who has questions for Homi, please pop them into the Q&A section. And I'd love to start us off with a couple that came in through the community as well, that are about brand building, as you've just gone over. So one that came in from Ida Lee Cathcart in the WomanMade community was, how do you grow your brand when you're a small one-woman business and have limited funds for advertising? She had a 3-part question, so let's just start with that part of it.
Oh, well, it's a brilliant question. Asked to a person who works in a company which has never had that challenge, to be very honest. But as I said, I think it all starts with really knowing what you want. And therefore breaking it up into a very clear time horizon. I think it's ambitious, but it's incorrect to expect to become $100 million in like a flash of in a year span. It doesn't happen that way. But I think if you follow that principle of about like what is it that we are looking for, and then what are the kind of things, if you look at this growth framework, we said, what is it that is important for this new venture or product of yours to expand? Should I be focused more on the mental part or the physical part? How do I balance the two? And it's a gradual process. And one thing I will say, I actually think today's world, especially in the more consumable space, is far more promising because of the way e-commerce has come together. Many a times, the single biggest challenge for new brands at growing are our retailers. And I lived this when I was working on the North America beverage business. We launched this fabulous sparkling lemonade called Lemon Lemon. And every retailer we went to loved it, right? So then the discussion was, so where do we put it? Oh, they said, oh yeah, we'll just take off a few facings of yours and replace it. We said, no, this is supposed to be incremental because it's a sparkling lemonade with real juice, which does not really exist. And it is PepsiCo, and we will market it well. And we spent almost a year debating with them where to put the product. Despite the muscle of PepsiCo, we saw a lot of substitution. We saw a lot of niche spaces, which consumers didn't really relate to because they were used to walking in the beverage aisle, and the product went away. Interestingly, that same product is there in France. It's doing beautifully because that category exists and the retailers love that product. So, but today's world where you have e-commerce gives you so much of a level playing field. If your proposition is good and you can really focus on some of these elements of driving mental availability, a distinctive proposition, a great product, we've seen that they give big brands a real run for their money.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah. And following up on that, we got a question here from Bella Hughes, similar, where she's got a startup with limited resources and marketing budget. And she's wondering, what are the most effective ways to penetrate once you're in mainstream retail? So if you are in there, then what are you doing? She says, is it promos, ads, sampling, demos, buy one, get one? And she says they're a national brand in 3,000 stores already. But I guess trying to focus on more of that mental availability.
Well, I would say anything that drives your penetration will be a significantly better thing. For example, if it's a product which fewer people are exposed to or aware of, I believe sampling is a fantastic vehicle. But you've got to think of an efficient way of doing sampling, especially when you're starting off. Sampling in the United States can be very expensive. So you've got to be very careful at how you do sampling. But for many brands, sampling turns out to be the single way of doing marketing. They make sampling their brand experience, and they do nothing beyond that. And that's also an amazing way of doing things. But if you look at what I just showed to you, if you're already there and you've got a great product, you need to just keep focusing on growing your penetration, but through the mental and the physical availability lens. And your physical availability part will be important. So will your mental availability piece. Pricing and promos are a necessary evil, but if that becomes the only way of fueling your growth, it is unsustainable, because some guy is going to come and chew you up. And then the worst culprits in that phrase are the retailers themselves, because they've got store brands which are significantly cheaper and they out promote everyone. And we've seen that. And some store brands are pretty good quality, right? When you go to a Costco, their store brand is a damn good brand. I mean, we all buy it for our household needs. So it's not easy. So it's a balance. But I think the important thing at this stage is you got to keep growing your penetration, come what may, and you will see that frequency will follow. Often these couponing and all is a way of getting people to buy more of you. But right now, you don't want people to buy more of you. You want more people to buy you. And then once they buy you, you need to figure out how to get them back and make sure they stay with you through the journey of the brand.
Got it. I think along the same vein, we've also had a question come in the community from Shannon Brown, which is about labeling. So she says her products are a new concept for most in the US. So she doesn't have to just identify the products, but also teach consumers how to use them. And it takes more time. So she's having a difficult time determining what to include on her labels so that the products can market themselves without her presence. So wondering, how do you make new products jump off the shelf in a sea of products?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that brings me to my point on distinction, because I think design and labeling is really important in today's world. What we are seeing across the world is a move away from complicated labeling into cleaner, simpler stuff. And I often say this, that if there is one area in which a brand, even if small, should spend some money before they launch, it's the area of design. It's to make sure you get your identity right from day one, because unsuccessful brands keep changing, and consumers cannot remember you. Even big brands, they struggle when changes happen, and then you see a bunch of loyalists start rejecting you because they don't like your logo or anything of that sort. So my suggestion is, it's important to figure out what in these new products is important for the consumers to know. What are those one or two must knows, and the rest you can just park it. So if it is about the way they are made, that they are freshly made, so be it. That should be the way it should be. And if it is about a certain flavor which has never been seen before, then that should be the focus on. But it has to be done in a way that it's distinctive. It's not a boring list of claims and a list of labels, because it's interesting. We have now learned that 95% of all shopping decision making is intuitive. They don't even spend time. And I'm sure many of you must have heard of this system 1 versus system 2 thinking, right? System 1 is the one which you almost don't know that it exists because you're used to it, whether the way you drive or the way you just do things almost automatically because it's a part of your life cycle. And system 2 is, if I were to ask you what is 37 into 53, that's your system 2, because you'll have to think about the answer. You'll have to spend some time. Shoppers mostly use system 1. We kind of think that they spend a lot of time looking at labels and all. They may once in a while, but they don't really have time. Each of us, when we go to stores to buy, we absolutely don't have time. We want to just run as soon as possible because we've got dozens of other things to do. And to fuel this whole system 1 cycle, there's a behavioral psychologist called it like, how do you create the best mental shortcuts? And that comes from a very compelling presence on the shelf. It could be the logo, it could be the claim, it could be the color palette. Just because the entire category is in blue doesn't mean you need to be in blue. You think white is the way to go, as long as in some kind of testing it works, absolutely, that's the way to do it. I did it once on a juice drink brand in India, which was on mangoes, and India is like the land of mangoes, right? Indian mangoes can't be compared anywhere in the world. Every brand looked the same. And I spent about a year and a half with my boss convincing our CEO that the white kind of look we were going with was the right look. He was not convinced. And it was the single best thing we did. And from that day till now, 14 years later, we have still not changed the color or the logo. That brand continues to fly. And I think that's the piece which I'd love for you to focus on. So don't worry about the fact that your product is new or it's people don't know enough about it. Just focus on the key message that you want them to get, but then do it in a distinctive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really exciting, getting that, if you do have the only white label out of a bunch of similar looking brands, it'll end up being more distinct by default too.
But if you're not relevant to the category, like there are some categories on which that would be an absolute no-no. Or in some cultures, the color may not be the right color. So you've got to do a little bit of work to making sure that is there. But I mean, those are some of the, almost like the ancillary parts. You need to tick those boxes to make sure you are not completely disrupting yourself in the process.
Yeah.
But by all means, we should disrupt the category.
And how do you recommend that entrepreneurs find out if something is a no-go? Is that focus groups? Is it surveys? Or how are they?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think we've conventionally been on focus groups and surveys. They're very expensive. I have to, you remember that in our framework, we spoke about the dig, build, and scale. And one of the exciting things that our insights team is working on is making everything online, making everything, a lot of it is AI based. So it's like automatic learning. And what used to earlier take us 6 to 8 weeks, we are hoping to cut down the learning curve to 2 days, if possible, in many cases. Because as you know, the world is really moving fast and we do not have time to overthink things. So we've got to be quick. And the teams which are working on it, they all work on like scope of works. They all are there to do a project for you for a month. If you tell them we'll come back to you after 2 months, it doesn't work for them because they're on to the next thing. So we just have to be very quick.
Okay. All right. Stepping back, we have a question here from Gwen Burlingame. That's kind of more big picture. In the early days of a brand, how do you recommend that a brand balance the need to build the brand, distinctiveness, awareness, following, etc., externally, and the need to drive velocity in store, both from a resource, time, and budget perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. And there's no formula. I wish there was a formula. In fact, that's a question which has been asked of us as we are rolling this out at PepsiCo. Is there a formula for a big brand, a small brand, a new brand? How do you focus your dollars? I think the first big thing is it has to be balanced between the physical and the mental part of it. Just going into the store and focusing on driving velocity and, volume without building out the brand attributes is a bad idea. So we've got to do the two. Now, within that, if you notice on both, there were the funnels, right? Maybe all that you do for a new brand is to make sure you're available more than anything else. And then let your brand do the talking by being relevant to the category and distinctive, because the visibility will come from the fact that your availability is there and you're spotted on the shelf. And then slowly you start getting into more visibility, because visibility in most organized trade is expensive. You've got to buy your visibility. It's not very easy, or you take an end cap and it costs a lot of money. And if you were operating in a emerging market like in Asia or in Africa, there's a small store, which is like a 6x6 store, which will have about 200 SKUs. So there is no question of any facing. Most of the brands are like tucked in. So it's very, very difficult.
Got it. Yeah. And we have one to follow on that, which is from Julia Kiroak. She says, if your products cover every growing trend and category in the market, how do you know what to double down on as a marketing focus to reach the consumer? More specifically, what's the best way to budget to figure out why consumers buy you to fit in their lifestyle? And I guess this is more harking back to the focus group discussion.
Yeah, but I think it's also about like how broad and how narrow do you get? And I can see there was another question also that kind of is in the same thing. I think to Julia's question, healthy snacks is a very, very broad term. And we've got the same challenge on Quaker Oats, which started off as being all about heart health and now covers pretty much everything. And there's often a debate in our company whether Quaker should continue to be heart and heart centric, or should it pretty much be like a nutrition brand, which covers everything. What we often recommend is we in fact have a term for it. We say sharply defined but broadly appealing, which is that you need to really focus on like your core in terms of like what is that product meant for, but make sure you do it in a way that it doesn't prevent others from coming and trying you. And Gatorade is a great example. It is absolutely created for the performance athlete. Does not stop the mom buying it in the store and giving it to her kids who are just running around in the park or anything of that sort. Now, if it was made super duper scientific with tons of ingredients and all, I don't think it would have gone broad because people would have actually been scared of what is put into it. So I think it's that little bit of a balance, but you do need to focus and not just make it generic, because there are too many healthy brands out there and they end up being very generic, and consumers do not trust many brands which talk about health.
Okay. That's a really good point, because that is such a huge space right now too. We have somebody who asked more on that focus group part. How do you feel that small startup brands should invest in research or go with their gut?
Oh my gosh.
When you have such limited resources.
I understand the constraint, but I think just going with the gut is not a smart idea. We have to listen to people. Now, hey, there are many ways of doing it. You can go to a Google search. You can take out a Survey Monkey. I mean, there are various ways of doing it. One does not need to employ Nielsen or, one of the Millward Browns or these big companies who will charge hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I think there are a ton of tools, and the whole technology world really allows you to find smart solutions. But I would say, even if there are 5 employees in a startup, and the 5 of you decide to pick 3 people in that market which is important to you and just go and talk to them, you will learn so much. I can't tell you how much. We have learned this in some of the way we've changed the way. I was talking about the human centricity. We actually have a process called Humanize. And I'll talk to you about what happened over here. In our marketing team on the beverage side, in the US business sits in New York, right? So there are all these cool kids who've come from Harvard and Stanford and Kellogg's, sit in New York, think life is New York City. What they did not understand was most of their brands are consumed by people deep in the heartland, in rural America, in the Midwest. They are not New Yorkers. They are not people from LA. They are not all into skateboarding and surfing and, partying. And it's a very different life. And they were all tasked. We have a big team. Each one of them was asked last year to speak to 2 people for an hour. And they were given a different kind of an approach, but they had to do it. There was no moderator, no facilitator. It was recorded. And they were told not to talk about their brands, but much more about their lives, and then figure out smart ways of seeing how the brands connect. Well, I saw some of the output because they put it into a video. It was spectacular learning. And many of them felt that, oh my gosh, we were completely wrong about the way we were perceiving things for our consumers. Now, that ended up being about a base of about 300 people that they spoke to. That's a pretty decent sample size. So my point is, if you could find a way of even speaking to 10 people twice or thrice in a month, you will learn a lot about them. So I would say, just don't trust your gut. Not good enough.
Awesome. Great advice. Great advice. Also on this topic of limited resources, Zoe Geller asks, and this is part of what you covered in your presentation. So she's asking, as a small food brand, do you believe we should focus on selling just on our website and e-commerce platforms?
Or e-commerce.
Or e-commerce platforms, yeah.
Yeah, so unless your website has got tremendous scale and traction, it's always difficult for people to come onto the website. One of the things we've learned is that websites are tough to navigate. Like we ourselves over here have a PepsiCo portal. Nobody visits it. I mean, it is really tough to get them. Give them an app, which is a really cool looking app, they'll get there. So one is the interface has to be very sleek and very smart. And it's not expensive. There's so much of tech talent in the world today. All you need to do is to catch two young students and they can design something cool. That's one. But I think the e-commerce platforms, you've got a traffic there which you would never get on your website or your own app. Now, it's not easy because it's also highly competitive. But I would say I would definitely try and look at the e-commerce platforms versus one's own website. The website happens when you're a big brand and you've been around and people just love to keep coming back to you. But not how many websites do we go to in our lives? We don't, right? I mean, okay, I might go to a Macy's or a Gap because I have to pick up an order or something, but you've got to come to that stage. That is a level of mental availability that's going to take time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also add that, you know, if you are building the website, you're investing a lot of money in trying to get traffic to it with SEO and ads there. So yeah, if you're tapping into a traffic source that already exists, like
absolutely,
an e-commerce platform, that can be a little bit more cost effective.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we've got one from Chris Ravenscroft, who asks, how do you feel about gender-specific food and beverage companies? We specifically concentrate on women at Beauty Gourmet and feel it's an advantage, but get mixed messages.
Yeah, I think that's the point I combine with the other question, which is on sharply defined but broadly appealing. I think if it is focused at a certain gender, by all means, you should absolutely go after it the right way. But it would be interesting to do it in a way that doesn't like completely alienate the other gender. Like, I mean, it's like saying today, we've often thought about, do we create some, we got a backlash too when I think our former CEO spoke about creating a snacking experience for women, which was a little more comfortable, you know, like something in terms of both carrying, and a lot of women spoke out saying, we don't need that. I mean, we are comfortable with having to lick the Doritos powder off our fingertips. No big deal.
Oh, yes, I saw this.
Yeah. And it was kind of in good fun, but it kind of showed us that you've got to be a little careful. Now, and it also depends what aspect of the gender thing. Is it a product attribute? Is it a usage experience? It has to be something meaningful. And in some cases, I think the product attributes work best because the certain gender would be looking for something distinctive in terms of maybe a beauty as attribute or something of that sort. But do it in a nice way and then be clear that that's going to be your primary base. Because if it's an absolute beauty product, which has aloe vera and anything of that sort, I'm just giving an example, the men are probably not going to have it, but who knows, the men might just end up having it because they also want to look young and they also want to look fresh. We see that in Southeast Asia all the time. There are a ton of products that we all look at which are female targeted, and we realize that men also pick them up because I think men say, hey, even I want my skin to look good. It's not just about, and anyway, we don't look as good as the women. So how about like having something which makes us look less worn out? So it can work, but the primary focus, and it's probably it's going to require time because these gender specific lines with great success, you can't really see too many of them. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of consistency.
Got it. Yeah. We got a question in about our the previous question, which was on e-commerce platforms. Rashon Peak asked if you have any recommendations on preferred e-commerce platforms.
Oh my gosh, I think kind of a no-brainer. It looks like Amazon is the right platform. They are very, very committed to like they're scaling up things well. We are also seeing great success now, unless you're in countries like China and all where they have completely a different game, their own platforms which are massive. But I think that's probably ends up being one of the best platforms to be on. And I think what is interesting is there's a great cross-pollination of people talent from a company like Amazon into, let's say, CPG companies, both sides. So they take a lot of people who understand the CPG world, especially if you're talking about our kind of F&B products. And then similarly, we also look at people like from their side who can understand how they operate. So I think it ends up being a bit of a win-win. Simple things. They want solutions which you cannot get in a retail store. So I just casually mentioned this. I think I was telling you that I met someone who works in our Amazon team, and we launched a sparkling water brand in the US called Bubbly, and I love it. But I just want to try a few more flavors, but I just can't keep buying cases and cases of them. So in that conversation, I was just telling her that I wish I got a bit more variety. And she said, "What do you mean? Don't you know we have like an 8-pack with 8 different flavors only on Amazon?" I said, "Nope." And that's what I buy now, because I get 8 flavors, out of which I love 6 of them. So my job's done.
Yeah.
But that's only available there. It's not available anywhere else.
Okay, and that's part of like how you can get more traction in
Yes, you got to give them some solutions, which is not always. Now, that's for the more established players. But the moment there's a newer brand or a newer product which doesn't have a big retail footprint, they are much more ready to be in line with the regular kind of packaging configuration or anything of that sort.
We had, shifting gears a little bit, we had a question come into the WomanMade community, which was on, it's from Nana Afua, and she asked, can you talk about fumbles you've seen in early companies or entrepreneurs that they make when they're trying to engage with PepsiCo, and how you might advise them to approach it better? So I know there's a lot of people tuning in that want to work with you guys. So can you speak to that process at all?
Yeah, I mean, I won't confess to being an expert where I have met a lot of, entrepreneurs coming to pitch ideas, but broadly and in conversation with a few of my other colleagues, I can say this. I think the absence of a crystal clear business plan, which has, I think, some financial viability like thought through, often worries us. The second thing is, interestingly, for a company like PepsiCo, we like to see great, bold ideas. What we don't want to see is stuff similar to what we do. And the moment we kind of see a really, like an idea which feels like a breakout idea, which we will probably never be able to do, and which is backed by a kind of a great growth strategy, if I could put it that way, building on what we just spoke about, you'd find us very excited about it. Now, the problem with companies like us is the immediate lens we apply is, can this be the next billion-dollar proposition? But I think while that's a nice sentiment to have, we also recognize that getting to billion-dollar brands takes a lot of time. And sometimes it could be a combination of a few brands which get us there. So we are much more open to that part versus earlier saying, if it's not big enough, an idea, let's not go for it. We are looking at smaller ideas because we believe that the ecosystem is there now. Thanks to all this e-commerce and all of that, it's there. The problem with these big billion-dollar scale brand ideas, which is why we would reject many in the past, is because we were kind of prisoners to the retail landscape. And we would know that the retailer will never put it out there. It will never gain traction. Our sales team will never be able to focus. And now we feel there are ways to make it happen.
Awesome. And if I can just add, for how to create your business plan so that it really sells. If you're interested in that, we've got a sprint that we're hosting on Alice starting September 9th, which is all about creating a business plan. So you can join that by going to the Turning Big Ideas into a Business community on Alice. Sorry, quick little plug there, because that is such an important part for how to get in front of partners and really make that partnership. Okay, we've got one question. We've only got 2 minutes left here and so many questions. So just quick shout out to everyone for being great at
Thank you. Yeah.
asking all these questions. It's really, really awesome. Let's see, picking someone who hasn't asked one yet. So we've got Movitsa Simmons, who asks, how can you leverage a new brand to expand into other product categories? In essence, introducing a new product with a brand, then using that brand to create other products across categories.
Okay. I would be very careful of that. I mean, expanding into other product categories. So there are two news, new brand and then new categories. It's not going to be easy. So my point of view is there has to be a kind of a roadmap to that before you get too ambitious into because first of all, people need to feel comfortable about the brand. They need to understand what the brand's about. What is its core? and then look at the expansion into other product categories. So probably the smarter way is new brand, and then probably some sublines, which are a little more within the current category space, before you look at absolutely new product categories, because that might be a bit too much of a stretch. Portfolio expansion, as we call it, is one of our biggest challenges, because every brand and every company wants to save money by not having to introduce dozens of new brands to fit dozens of new categories. But stretch of a brand is not an easy task. Your brand really needs to stand for something that will allow it to stretch. It just doesn't work. We've done that in the past by stretching our beverage brands into food spaces, by saying, okay, so if Gatorade, and that's been successful, but it's taken us a long time and 2 cycles before it got there, where Gatorade launched from a hydration drink to also the whey protein bars, which, by the way, taste phenomenal. But the first time we did it about in 2010, it did do well. And maybe the brand wasn't ready for it. It was still a very iconic brand, but it probably just wasn't ready for it.
Right. Yeah, that is pretty difficult to expand that brand that way. One other quick one, I know we're a little bit over time, but one from Alexandra Quintero, who is also asking about scaling. She's got a handcrafted bakery product, and she wants to know how she can maintain a competitive price on a handcrafted food product.
Wow, I'm not sure if my expertise is in this area, because I guess the biggest problem with handcrafted products would be shelf life, right? And therefore, I think one of the biggest challenge would be you would need to create distribution points, which are probably more close to the place where you make them and all of that. So it feels a little, I have to confess, this probably needs a little thought. I just don't want to toss an answer at you, but handcrafted products being scaled, I haven't seen as many of them, but you see them within a catchment area, within a particular city or a particular state, and you begin to see that beginning to spread. But it does require a very, very efficient distribution system, because most of these handcrafted products, I think, especially bakery products, the biggest positive is freshness and taste. I think that's what you go for, and probably the absence of too many preservatives, and that it's as close to having stuff made fresh. How do you retain that? And then within that, how do you manage your costs and your profitability is quite the challenge.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking a stab at that too. And I know we are over time now. Thank you everyone so much for attending. And Homi, this has been immensely helpful. Some people are wondering if there's a good way to get in touch with you after this.
Of course. Sure thing. I guess the best way is to get in touch with me over email. And we could probably send that over, and I can try and get back whenever possible.
Great. Then we will send out that in the follow-up email. So everyone who attended here today will get one of those that has a link to the recording. We'll have Homi's email address for further questions. And then, thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Homi. This was
Thank you. Great questions. I wish I could have had a better discussion with all of you, but that was great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
We'll have to make this 2 hours next time. And for everyone who joined, you can find more resources, opportunities, and links to register for the next PepsiCo Expert AMA in the WomanMade community at hellols.com. So the link is in the chat over there for you.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.